Cool. Welcome all, Plan Weekly, April 28th. I have the first point. Just a quick note, team update. Julian's moving over from product planning to project management because he is participating in an internship for learning on the back end. He's always had an interest kind of in both the front end and the back end. So we determined that now would be a good time with Heinrich kind of temporarily going over to the database sharding team to help out with the backend stuff on project management. So he's already kind of started taking over or taking on some backend project management stuff. He's finishing up his product planning front end stuff. And of course, he's still around for any of the front end stuff if you have any questions or anything. But as of now, he is on project management. Questions, comments? Cool. All right, move on to Alexis.
Hello. I haven't had enough coffee today, so let's see how this goes, y'all. Yeah, immediately I zoom in. I just wanted to go over some research I did recently around jobs to be done. I don't know if y'all know what jobs are. You probably do. We have it defined in the handbook. You can also open this mural and kind of learn more about it. But, you know, kind of moving away from user stories and thinking more about what are our users trying to get done? Like, what is their day like? What is kind of like their ideal selves or like ideal role, and how can we help them get there, right? So, and there's two ways to think about it, like more activity or function based versus kind of like process or progress based, which I preferred because it's more like, you know, what's your ideal and how can we help you get there? And finding those gaps is where products kind of become lovable because they help people get their jobs done better. So I shared this mural. I won't go over it too in depth because you have access to it and you can look over it as much as you like. I also am creating an epic here to kind of break down some of the insights when I have time. So it's pretty I don't know, in draft right now, but you could leave comments if you want. So the basic steps here is just talking with a lot of participants. I didn't talk necessarily just with GitLab users because I think it's interesting to see, you know, it shouldn't be tool or product specific. It's just like talking with a hiring persona, we call it, which would be Parker or probably someone like Gabe or Kristen. So just kind of understanding who those people are and what they want. And the purpose of this KR that I was working on was to validate some of the jobs we had already come up with and plan and kind of map those to our different categories. So the category I was looking at was boards. So, you know, first kind of just mapped out the general kind of flow of what Parker might be doing more on like any given iteration here, and then drill down on who Parker is. And our personas are not really supposed to be like gender specific, so I'm going to say they or, but Parker, kind of our PM persona. And something interesting I noticed about them, it kept popping up in interviews, is that they spend a lot of time trying to understand progress, trying to understand where things are. The first thing they do in the morning is kind of like get in and they're like, all right, where is anything? Like, what were the things I said I needed to do today? Like, where did the team make progress where I thought, you know, they might? And then there's a lot of like stand-ups, in-person stand-ups, if y'all ever did them, I'm sure you probably remember. And a lot of like status meetings or having to kind of like schedule meetings. I heard a lot of pain points around having to schedule meetings and catch up with people and figure out what was going on. And that's kind of the same thing they do at the end of the day. At the end of the day, they like create a plan for the next day and they create a bunch of to-dos for themselves and they schedule a bunch of meetings for tomorrow to catch up with people. So like, you know, they're having to hunt for available times. They're reviewing their own to-dos, they're checking their email all the time. And this is kind of general. It's not like every single person, but just a general Parker. And they really love Again, kind of think about Gabe and Kristen, right? They love being creative. They love solving business problems, really like ownership of a product. And, tied to that, like when they have leadership or a lot of people, that I talk to might have maybe not as great of leadership as we do. And they just have them kind of telling them what to do and deadlines that don't make sense. So they really dislike that. They really love motivating their team. A happy team is able to get things done. They want to create that psychological safety. They love that collaboration. So they want people to feel like happy and motivated to like share ideas. That ideation aspect kept coming up. Of course, like generating value, right, for the company and being valuable themselves, making product ideas a reality with their team, not just them. And what also came up a lot was learning from like the diverse skills and knowledge of their team. Like they don't need to know every single thing, but they really love learning from all the different experts on their team. Again, supporting, thinking of ways to like opportunities to improve, like both themselves, their product, make their team's lives easier. And then kind of the inverse, right? Like they hate keeping things up to date. They feel like they spend a lot of time kind of wasting time, like keeping documents and status of work items, et cetera, up to date. They don't like micromanaging people. They don't want to feel like they have to like bother their team all the time and be like, hey, where's this? Where's this? Like, is this blocked? Or like, what's going on here? So yeah, that poor or stuck communication is hard. And many people mentioned, especially during the pandemic right now, this has been hard for them because it's gotten worse and maybe they're not, they haven't been distributed before. Like I mentioned, like these arbitrary deadlines, don't like that. They make it, it feels like they can't produce their best product if they just have someone telling them what to do when it kind of seems like arbitrary, or the person doesn't have a lot of visibility into what's going on. Again, manually updating, getting ordered around, being surprised by the status of work is hard when, they're kind of at the end of maybe a cycle and it's like, oh, I didn't realize that was a problem, which causes work to slip. Project switching, setting up meetings all the time is hard for a lot of people. They spend a lot of time literally scheduling meetings, finding times when everyone can meet. And, the time spent doing all these things keeps them away from the stuff they love, which is, innovating and creating and helping their team. They feel successful. Again, when this one I think was interesting, someone mentioned like, I don't even want my team to need me. Like I want to be able to like go away for like 2 weeks and they're fine. They know what to do. They're empowered. They feel like I trust them and they know what they're supposed to do. I've communicated the goals well to them. They're successful when items are moving through the workflow, of course. Again, everyone understands the goals and basically the team is empowered to work well so that they can deliver on commitments, react quickly. They can leave the office without like having a long to-do list that they feel like they need to get to tomorrow or that they haven't gotten to today. And one thing I thought was nice is that Parkers don't feel like upset necessarily by failure. They're just like, hey, that's a challenge to get better next time. So I thought that was cool. And, they don't think of like work slipping or something like that as a failure of the team. It's just like, hey, what can we do better, right? And I'm sure we feel that again from Gabe and Kristen, that they just want to help us and make us do better, not make us, enable us or empower us. Again, communicating, inspiring, solving business problems. They produce good quality products, of course. So like users are happy, the team's motivated. And when they accomplish these goals, they feel proud, of course. The team has like a team spirit, they're motivated. Some Parkers I thought was interesting, like, if they do well, of course, then they're trusted with better projects. So maybe this is kind of like client-based, but it's like, if they demonstrate that they can get things done, if they have a good track record, then they're trusted with better projects, whatever that means, whatever better is. And when they're having a good time in the role, they just like can't wait to get to work and see like, what did my team do? I'm so excited. What progress did they make? So I thought about this, mapped out some of the insights specifically to boards. I thought about like, okay, what maybe did Parker last hire a board for? what would be harder in their job without a board. So that's kind of like, what do they need a board for? If, you know, if thinking about if they didn't have a board, what would happen? That's probably what they need a board for. And then risk of not having access to it. So kind of things that are probably pretty obvious, right? Like things don't get delivered. There's basically just like chaos, no single source of truth. People don't know what's going on. The team doesn't feel empowered because they don't know like what to work on next. They don't understand priority. And then they, you know, you feel it like demotivates you because you're probably not delivering effectively either. And then thinking about kind of general success indicators or like desired outcomes here. Again, y'all can go through this. I don't want to spend the whole time. I don't want to like spend this whole meeting on this. But and then thinking about kind of what about our product might pull Parker away from the kind of board, I guess, if we get feature specific that they have currently. What about their feature or just kind of like life, you know, workflow right now might like kind of push them towards us, or like what are their constraints maybe right now? Like what are the realities? Like they literally don't have budget for a tool, something like that. Thinking about would like really push them off that ledge to look for a tool, even if they do feel those constraints. So literally maybe their team is just like, they keep missing deadlines, or their tools are so slow. So it's like, okay, I can't take this tool anymore. I need to get a new one. And then some of the options that they currently use, which is, you know, a lot of synchronous meetings. I'd say that's our main competitor for a boards tool, is a bunch of synchronous meetings. Also, some are using GitLab. Trello was a big one. And then another big competitor would just be like, you know, Google Sheets, right? Excel documents that they keep updating and they have to manually update and then going through them in synchronous meetings, stuff like that. So based on like all this information, I'm, you know, TLDRing it, but I think the main thing that boards are helping Parker do is really like radiating that the current status of work continuously. And what I'm trying to convey with that is that it's the current status, right? So it's like, this is the ideal. It's like always up to date. And that doesn't mean like the team has to keep it up to date or like anything that like they need to do. It's like kind of like, what can we do for them, right? Current status, right? Continuously. So it's like always there. That way, we'll get to it in a second. So I think that would be the main job. And I think like to get that job done, you also really need to visualize a workflow, of course, right? If you're using boards tool. So kind of mapping that out based on like what I said earlier, like what is their ideal? Where are they at now, right? I think based on like what the people I talk to, what Parker really wants from Plan is to be empowered, to be a innovator of solutions, right? That improve lives and grow organizations. Like that's kind of what I get from Parker. Like that's what they want. Like that's why they got into maybe product management or even project management, right? What they might want from boards is kind of like a partner in product ownership, right? So how can we kind of be their maybe product owner, or like, you know, like how can we fill that role for them and like help them keep things up to date, keep things on track, things like that. So I think the primary job, kind of like we just talked about, is really just aligning teams and organizations, which means like that alignment, which means like the goals, expectations, status, they're all transparent and understood. So transparent is a big thing here. And again, kind of talking about workflows, you want to empower the teams, right? They don't want the teams to have to rely on them. They want the teams to feel empowered to do their job, however they need to do it. And they know what they need to do. They understand the goal that they're working toward. And again, this is like the two kind of functional jobs here. So the status of things right now in talking with people is that currently to get like this alignment idea done, currently Parker has to like basically organize a meeting, organize and conduct a meeting, or wait for stand up, things like that. If perhaps like a stakeholder asks what's the status, or like, how is this one thing progressing? So the status of work is pretty unclear, priorities unclear. They're kind of wasting their time micromanaging people. They feel bad about that. They have to schedule meetings all the time. Again, they're wasting time on like ensuring everything's up to date and documentation even is up to date. There's lack of awareness on impediments, like impediments to progress. So that leads to those unpleasant surprises. So what that process might be like how they might come to us is that, they're having this issue and maybe they're like already using GitLab, right? And so they're like, okay, I will try mapping our workflow, right? Which we mentioned earlier, to GitLab board to see if that aligns everyone on the status of work. So this could be an optional, or this could be a way to us. And then the ideal would be that instead of when a stakeholder asks, what's going on, they have to like schedule a bunch of meetings or talk with individual people and hunt them down and be like, what's going on? They don't even need to do anything. Like the board just does it for them. It's radiating that work. And I say radiating all the time, and it's a weird word, but it's radiating that current state of work continuously. So it's like Parker doesn't have to do anything. Teams are aligned. They know what's going on. They know the priority. The ownership of task is transparent, and like any impediment to progress is easy to spot and address. This one, I don't know if we've solved yet, right? And that's okay. Like I think it's just opportunity that they're probably still wasting time, even if they use our board currently, keeping things up to date. And that is maybe an issue, but also an opportunity, which I kind of mentioned here. And I mentioned like what is ideal here. But yeah, I mentioned this as well here. So it's like, I don't know if we've solved this in our flow, if we're thinking of kind of like the little items Parker has to do to get this job done of, radiating the status. If you think about all the things they need to do that within a board currently, we haven't solved every single problem here. Like we can make things less manual, maybe. We can help them keep things up to date. Maybe we can make our workflow management, like, I don't know that we really have a whole lot of like a workflow management tool. Maybe we could think about that a little more if that's prioritized. So there's some opportunities here, but like, this is just to get a general idea of what Parker wants to do and how we can maybe help them here. And then along the way, is there some ways we can kind of like differentiate ourselves or maybe innovate? Like, is there a way we could help teams better learn from each other? Because we know they really enjoy that. This is kind of, I guess, I don't know, corny. I don't know. I feel for it, but I love it. Like, how do we make teams feel more psychologically safe? Like, how do we make them feel they're safe to share ideas, be open about collaboration, things like that. I think a cool one would be like, can we just get rid of stand-up? Like, how could we replace stand-up or like status meetings, things like that? Is there a way we could do that? And then, yeah, like automation, of course, things like that are really important. So yeah, that is like jobs to be done. I'm working on quality management too, like getting really deep into this. If y'all are interested, I'll share that later, but cool. So this is in the agenda. Y'all are free to look at it. And that is my spiel, if y'all have questions.
Thanks, Alexis. That was awesome. Definitely interesting seeing a peek into my world. I'm wondering, so this looks like a bottom up, like issue tracking boards, jobs to be done in terms of managing the team's work and status. Did you run into any that are like top down, like the epic level planning, product planning down in terms of the jobs to be done? And could they, if we're going to move epic boards and issue boards together, like, do you see alignment between the jobs to be done for both of those objects?
Yeah, I think so. I was talking with more of like product managers, right? So I think to really, I wouldn't want to like truly validate like a program kind of board through this, but I think we'd probably want to talk with like, again, more like program specific people. But I think it's kind of just like a higher level, right? So instead of making sure individual teammates know the status or priority, or like you understand like dependencies or impediments between like teammates, right? Within a project, it's just like higher level. You're having to manage like teams now. So instead of like, Catherine has an issue here that I need to help with, and I don't know about it because it hasn't been flagged up, and like help me figure this out, right? It's like, oh, team, I don't know what's on my desk. Team Red Bull has a problem, and they haven't told me about it, and I'm like having to hound them all the time for status updates. And team, cell phone has dependencies on them, and how do we flag that up? How do we make the status of their work and current, up to date, and visible to everyone? So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's just like it's just one step up. But I think we'd want to get like more research from program people on that.
Yeah, I think here, like, we use epics to do that, and we have our direction pages. We don't have a layer that's doing the program side. This is all on us. So that might be something to think about too. But I do think that the epic boards for sure are where I can see where things will come together, because just looking at a issue board, everything looks all over the place, and I don't really see precedents or how things are going to come together in like the bigger product itself.
Yeah.
I was just gonna add that qualitative evidence from my customer convos kind of suggests that they are relatively the same job to be done. It's just like, if you think about a zoom button, right? You're like zooming out, and then you're going to zoom down, because of like, especially in safe organizations, the product manager will work at the epic level, and then the product owner, who's like the scrum master basically for each product team, will work at basically the issue level and take the epic and then break it down into issues for the team. But yeah, like I think there might be a little bit of nuances in how you would want to see progress between the two, but for the most part, it's basically a very similar thing. You just do it less frequently at the higher level, like, at the epic level, and say if you'll do it quarterly, and then the product owner will do it bi-weekly, basically, down below. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think we can make like some pretty safe assumptions and then just kind of validate them out with real people. But I think that makes sense, Phil. Kristen, Gabe, Donald, did y'all have more questions there?
Yeah, mine was the same, and I think you all answered that. I'm just going off of when I was at larger more traditional organizations, and this was like a decade ago, there was typically a separate role for project manager and product manager. So I was curious if that in our research of other organizations, if that's if those roles have been kind of combined. We do it a little bit differently at GitLab too, in that I think the traditional project management responsibilities are kind of shared between product managers and EMs, and kind of everyone on the team. But yeah, I was just curious if our research has found that that's how organizations are doing it now, are kind of combining product manager and project management roles.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that when I was talking with like actually the people that would pop up that were in a role of project management, those were actually the people that were managing like quality, which was kind of interesting. So those are, when I recruited for people, I didn't recruit on role. I recruited on like, what are they doing? Are they managing a board? Like, when's the last time you touched a board? Are you assigning tasks? Things like that. So oftentimes that was like a product or product owner or product manager. My brain hurts, but yeah, not often a project manager. And I didn't get a lot of like scrum masters or anything like that either. So yeah, maybe it is combined, and that's kind of like a cool thing to think about. We could think about why, right, Donald? Yeah. Do you have any context on that, Gabe or Kristen? Like what that could mean?
I think Donald said it correct. Like EMs take on a lot of that role too. And here, like, we aren't really chasing people the same way a project manager would, because we don't really own shipping. the EMs do and the engineering team. So it's a little different here. But I have been in that place before where you have to do both.
And the chasing aspect, I think, is like status updates for stakeholders, by the way.
Yeah, or like pressure to hit a certain date because the ship is leaving the port kind of thing. But we don't do that at GitLab, so we're sheltered from that as PMs here. We still have to know status and what goes into the release post, which is good just to know when things are done. But we just move the date if it misses, so it's not as big of a deal in our org.
Yeah, a lot of the companies that I've worked with now, they either just rename project manager to product manager, but don't really change anything about what the role actually does. In larger companies that do SAFe, you have a product manager who sits kind of above a bunch of different teams. That each team is run by a product owner who's also the scrum master. And then also, especially where there are lots of dependencies between teams, organizations have what's called the delivery or release manager, which is effectively like a project manager who works on like scheduling dependencies across groups. So that's what I've seen at least.
I think my next point too is just for us, like the motivation is to drive usage and revenue at the end of the day. So everything we're looking at is to make the right prioritization, the right choice to increase money for the company and to make it better for our users. I also just added a note because seeing the madness of that mural really stood out to me, all the different tasks. I know, Gabe, you did a comment recently where you listed all the things that you do regularly at Cadence in your week. But I would just say that a to-do list in some format is always needed. Adding and removing custom items from a to-do list to keep track of everything in that, all of those different activities. And that's not currently in GitLab where you can just add custom to-dos. So
yep, everyone mentioned to-dos at the end of that's how they plan. They plan themselves, right? They plan a team and they plan themselves and they plan a product. And one interesting thing too, talking with internal people as well, I did that a little bit. We at GitLab, as like Parker's, focus way more on backlog management within the board itself versus external users, which are participants, which I thought was interesting and probably makes sense, right? Because we don't have like a lot of backlog management necessarily outside of the board is my assumption. Like we don't have that true kind of like feature within the list. But I thought that was an interesting thing. And Donald, to your point, like I think the next step, or just in general, we focus on like one persona first, or I was at least, because it was like kind of like the hiring persona. But if we were to research also like EMs, or I guess they could be like project managers to your point, or whatever their role is, then it would be kind of like aiming this research again, but like at the Delaney's as we define them at GitLab, if that makes sense. Cool. All right, I'm happy to move on unless we have more questions. I don't want to hog all the time. If you have questions, go for it, but otherwise.
I don't know where we are in the agenda, so I'll just jump in real quick and say that I also did validation research for jobs to be done, and there was a ton of overlap with what Alexis did after seeing all of her information. So I posted my board there, but I think there's value in us maybe like talking through some of our findings together. And then separately, I'm struggling a little bit this morning to kind of finalize my jobs in relation to the jobs that currently exist on the planned jobs to be done page. I think that there's value in us revisiting that page as a whole and determining what maybe is a primary versus a secondary job, what might need to be removed or tweaked a little bit because of potential redundancy. So now that we've all done this great research, I think there's value in maybe us just kind of collectively reviewing that page and determining how we can refine it a little bit. But that's probably a conversation for another call. I just wanted to get it on everybody's radar.
I'm cool with that. I was just gonna say, I think you and Alexis have all the research, like in your head, and you're intimately aware of it. So I'll follow y'all's lead on however you want to fix up the jobs to be on pages.
I started on a proposal this morning. So I'll share that with everybody in the merge request for my jobs and just tag everybody in it. We can collaborate from there.
I'd love to see that pared down and for me to fully understand why each one's there too. So I'm happy to also assist if I can.
Yes, please. Thank you.
I think we're on to 4A. That's my item. Kristen told me last night in Slack there's just maybe some confusion around what we're trying to accomplish and what the goals are and like what the ideal end state was. So I kind of wanted to not talk and listen and like help us clarify what some of those things are, so we all kind of like understand what we're trying to achieve with some of the work and refactoring proposals that are floating around. So I guess with that, Kristen, do you want to provide any more context or?
Yeah, I think, well, yeah, for
conversations?
me personally, also, like I watched the video. I tried to catch up on all the issues this week from kickoff because I wasn't here for that day. It does feel broad still, like in terms of there's a lot to do, including the issue redesign and what do we really mean by that. And Alexis asked a bunch of questions, some of which I've answered on the page, but we're going to talk through more of these today. So I think the more that we can just get down to a laser focus in terms of the expectations, the deliverables, and what the designers are working towards, and make sure we also onboard their like what they would like to work on as well, so it's in a format that works for them. I think that will just sort of help set us up for success as we kick off these next sprints. I'm wondering if we should collab in the issue, Gabe, or if you wanted to talk through some of these open questions right now and just make sure we're on the same page with them.
I think it's great to ask questions and talk through it if anybody's confused, and then we can update the issue, of course. But since we're here, like, it might be efficient. But I think from my vantage point, the new issue view came about for a couple different reasons. One, because we want to eventually have issue type hierarchies and migrate epics to that, so we're basically on the same object model for our planning objects. And then also to refactor to a single tech stack so that we don't have a bunch of overlapping technologies. I learned a lot this morning pairing with Natalia about like why we still use jQuery places and like really like how much technical debt we have. And so if we have to refactor a lot of the issue view to get to the single tech stack, then it also makes sense to think about, are there any UX improvements that we want to make to better support like that kind of view app being used for like basically an epic hierarchy, as well as an issue, as well as a test case, as well as a requirement. So I think that's where like from my perspective, the really goals are refactoring basically to a single tech stack for our surface area, and then refactoring epics to a single type, like to an issue type hierarchy, basically. And then whatever the team else like services that we need to prioritize for refactoring, we should look at that too. But then like if we're going to be doing a lot of this, does it make sense to make UX improvements? And it seems like it might, but.
That's good. That aligns with how I was thinking about it. I think that the UX improvement part is the part that maybe needs more definition, because like at the end of the day, if we had the issue the exact same it is now, would that be okay as long as we met these other goals? Do we need to have a change in the UX of the issue detail page? Those are some of the open questions I still had, and maybe I missed the answer as well. Or should we just say only in service of this refactor in the same code base do we make an improvement to the UX?
I think it's up for debate to the team, like if we need to improve UX. I'm sort of the mind that like it's not, basically we're going to do a lot of work refactoring everything anyways. And I think I would love input from the front end engineers. Like, what if we kept the view exactly the same, right? What would that mean? And would it be more work basically to refactor everything to what it is now and then make substantial changes to the UX and in the view itself, because like I don't think the view is necessarily scalable for the vision of extensible issues. But I think this is a great conversation and to get input from the team on what they think is the best way to move forward.
Yeah, so because we kind of took that approach with boards in that we were trying to work a refactor into getting it to the same view as legacy boards. And we found that there wasn't a whole lot of benefit to that. Like it still took a decent amount of time. It still took a good amount of work. So if we're going to make changes for the better, I think it may be the same amount of effort to just go ahead and make those changes now and essentially act as if we're starting from like a greenfield project with issues, as opposed to saying, let's go away for the next couple milestones and completely replace the code, but then don't really have much to show for it as far as new features or any improvements to the issue page. So I'm all for if we, and I think it's pretty like in the issue feedback issue, there's a lot of good ideas in there. I think that kind of shows that there are improvements that we can make. And I think it makes sense to go ahead and make some of those changes now while we're doing the refactor.
I'll just voice what I was saying. So like from my personal perspective, and Gabe's probably different, like I'm okay with it being like epics being exactly the same as long as they move over onto issue types. If there are any UX improvements, then I see it as a win, but for me, it would be secondary to actually having the components and the objects shifted. I'm also wondering too, like if we are going to tackle like just redesigning the issues or epics and every page, then we should think potentially of moving one of the design sprints at the very beginning, the first 2 weeks, for bigger, broader design with the team so that they can get ahead of that. So we've got the full 8 weeks to think about this new world, this new design, as well as how that supports the components moving. I just wouldn't want to leave that to the end of the 8 weeks.
Can you recap that? Like what is it that you don't want to do? What is the risk?
Just so that we have something to look at earlier on. I'm just thinking of shifting, if we're going to redesign like an issue detail view, having that shifted to be earlier on instead of the very last thing is all.
I think
So that
that
we can
kind of
collaborate with the team better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So because if it's bigger picture. Mm-hmm.
Holly, do you want to voice over what you added, because it's related to this theme and to the second point, number 3?
Yes. So I think after looking at the issue that Alexis had created, she also maybe had a similar question, which is what we're trying to accomplish in this? What do we want to have kind of delivered or completed at the end of this session? My thought was that we were going to just maybe do smaller experiments. We've done a lot of validation. We've done a lot of research. I feel like we have pretty good understanding of who our users are in this case and some of the problems that they have, as well as opportunities to improve issues and some of the other parts of plans. So my thought was that we would just kind of dive in with what we've got, take that information and start creating some problem statements, some prototypes, testing and getting feedback and looking at ways we can potentially improve things. But I don't think that necessarily the 4-cycle process is a bad process by any means. I think it was just not necessarily what my expectations were in terms of what we need to kind of accomplish or what we want to understand at the end of this design sprint process. So that's really my biggest question is, what are we trying to accomplish with this? I feel like we've talked about this a couple of times, but I don't feel confident that it's been finalized. Maybe that's just me.
Yeah, I think we need to know the goal, like the the output. And I guess for me personally, like I don't feel comfortable like I don't know, like tackling things. I just want to and maybe it could be like a solo thing, but like I just kind of want to understand, like validate some of the assumptions we're making or that we have made, like with especially like external participants maybe before I start kind of moving things around. But I don't know, like maybe actually, let's talk about the goal first. How about that? Like, what is the objective here? Like that I think Holly and I have both voiced.
So
I think the goal's still the same, right? Like just, I think we're aligned that we need to have the issue types combined. We need to move epics onto issue types and get it in the path to get us there. And the UX can be better to support that. So what we need to do is figure out the steps over the next 8 weeks that will get us to the point where engineering can then break this down.
And what do you mean by combined? And what do you mean by epics are an issue type? I know these are silly questions. I just want to make sure.
For me, it's that spreadsheet that I know I keep referencing. Every column on or every row on that sheet. Why do we have assignee turned on for epics, but not, or for issues, but not for epics, and requirements, and going across, like just that we've thought through every single field and widget in that view. And so that when the engineers pick up, they know what they're coding for and why, and that it's been validated. And then how do we have a consistent view for issue view that can then also support epics requirements and all the other issue types?
Can I share my screen real quick too, just to run through something that might help? So like going back to the why this work stream and why now, like I kind of try to outline in this thing that I brought up a while ago and raised, but like right now it's confusing that epics are at the group level, not issues. It's confusing that epics are not at the project level. Like most organizations I've talked to, they want to do all their planning at the group level or at the project level, but not split between the two. There's basically like a desire for having more clarity about in your work item hierarchy. So like instead of using labels to know like if something's a capability or a feature, however it's defined, they want to be able to like have a clear definition of what those work items are. And basically like based on everything that I've heard over the last 18 months I've been at GitLab, like if we go down the lines of continuing to iterate in very small pieces on epics and issues and that sort of thing, we're going to end up at the point where there's not really any real difference between an epic and an issue other than epics can be nested, right? Because people want all the same metadata on epics now, like being able to associate a milestone to an epic, assign an epic to somebody, like add weight to it. Like there's all these different use cases that is basically what's on an issue. And we're sort of duplicating the effort between the two models, which when it's really basically the same underlying thing under the hood that could be the same model, just separated by issue types. And so this is also sort of in line with I linked to this extensible issues epic that kind of outlines why, because if you go to and look at some of the requirements that customers have conveyed to us, they basically want to be able to define their work item hierarchy in a clear way. They want to be able to customize each issue type within that hierarchy to have different metadata on it. And then like if you kind of go a little bit further too, like if you have everything in this base model that it has these like extensible fields, widgets as they're called in this idea, it's then a lot easier to maintain one model and maintain one view. Like for example, epics, we spent a long time creating epic boards. If epics were a type of issue, we would have it like out of the gate already. So it's sort of about being more efficient with the resources that we have in plan, but also like making it a more intuitive user experience as a whole for how planning objects work together. Does that answer your sort of question is like why? Like, or help or anything?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think, and also I just want to scope it like to, you know, what we think we can accomplish or like, what do we need now to move forward, and just make sure we understand that, just so we don't get like too broad and like kind of miss the mark, right? Like, and end up with nothing. Like, what do we need for this first like iteration of the project? Meaning like, doesn't mean we can't come back and add more, but like, what does the team need from Holly and I, or like just UX in general for this first iteration to move forward towards this like shared model?
I think there's two ways you can approach it. You can approach it like, what's the smallest amount of work we need to provide to engineers so that they can move forward. There's also the opposite approach of what's the ideal, like, and then work backwards to remove the constraints to get to the ideal. And I think it would be great if we, sort of like what Donald said earlier, thought about the ideal. It doesn't mean we're going to do it all at once, or we have to do it all at once. But if you treat this as a greenfield opportunity from a UX perspective over the next 8 weeks, then we can sort of work with engineering, say like, if this is really where we think we should end up a year from now or whatever, let's work backwards to reverse engineer it to remove like the specific constraints along the way to achieve the ideal. And so I think I would like to see more of like that kind of thinking, even if we don't start with that, if that makes sense.
So I think that makes sense, but what I'm trying to get at is like, if we think about greenfield, like vision, right? Like that could be a lot. That could be like, what is the entire flow? Like, what do all the lists look like? How do we segment everything by view? Like, which is awesome. Like, I would love to think about that, but that could grow a lot. Is there a way that would be helpful to scope this vision work? Would it be to like, what would a consistent issuable model be? Is that kind of what we're thinking the scope is?
Yeah.
Does it make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think so. It does. And I would say like the most important things that we have to figure out in order to convert epics to a work item hierarchy is like, what does that look like in a consistent way in the product? And then if you were like, how do the relationships work, right? I think that would be like a huge chunk of it. And then do we need to make any changes to the issue detail view to better facilitate the experience of using a single object in a hierarchy instead of like epics and issues and all this other stuff? Because what this will also enable us to do is we're working on simplifying groups and projects, which means eventually groups and projects are the same thing on the back end. And then we'll have issues available basically at the group level. So no matter what level you're at, it's a consistent experience. So I think, yeah, I don't know if anyone else has any opinions, but that's my 2 cents.
I'll second on relationships. Like to me, that would be maybe deserve its own design sprint, because that's going to be so different. And how does that look on an issue? How do you show parenting?
And you mean like parenting and relationships now that we're not like kind of constricting it to just merge requests or like the same object? It's going to be like everything can be tied together. That makes sense.
Yeah, there'll be a finish start relationship to another issue or to an epic that it's in. So a more formalized parent.
It's kind of like this. I linked the issue here, but like if you think about if all these things, maybe not the MR and the vulnerability that are outside of this, but all these are just like issue types, you're relating them together, but then also relating them across different work item hierarchies. Because this is basically what our customers want to be able to do, where there's like quality management, a test session, there's test cases in that, which are linked to requirements are linked to the issues to implement them. And then there's this roll-up report. And each of these have different sort of personas that will like reference these sort of work item hierarchies, but how do you facilitate this sort of a relationship where you have like related blocking parent-child in a consistent way? And that's where I think it's a huge and important thing to think through, because there's more and more teams now that want to add relationships to things, to issues and merge requests, like vulnerabilities, for example. And this is part of like when you're thinking about, should we focus on redesigning issue view, and why I say it's sometimes not scalable. If every object that wants to be related to an issue is related to an issue, it would take up my whole screen, like above the fold, probably even 2 pages worth of lists of just related things, right? So I think that's one of the reasons why I'm thinking like maybe thinking a little bit more greenfield about it and approaching the problem kind of with fresh eyes.
Awesome.
That
Thanks,
might be
Al.
something we could also delineate on that spreadsheet. It's just like whether design could talk through like issue description doesn't need to change, linked objects do, like we do need a better way, or like some of these maybe could stay, like maybe we decided discussions and comments we're not going to touch, but like having just a little formality around like what parts we're redesigning and why as well.
or like what need to be, just keep them consistent for now. Is that what you're thinking, Kristen? Or like,
Yeah.
so maybe we could think about what are the most like risky objects in there, and like risky, I mean like, or maybe like most potential, like if we improve them, it will really improve the user's quality of life. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what would be helpful for me then is to maybe align on kind of the overarching problem statement that we want to work toward, and then move toward that. This was very helpful for me, so thank you all for explaining, because I was under the impression that we were going to be doing more just high level discovery, and therefore we wouldn't necessarily be delivering anything at the end aside from maybe just research and findings and things like that. But it sounds like we do want to actually have, you know, something in place so that stories can be written and work can be started at the end of this. So that being said, I do feel like it makes more sense to do a little bit more of the front end validation and exploration. But I do think it's important that we align on kind of what that overarching problem statement is first, and then have that as our North Star to guide us throughout the remainder of the process. But that's something that we can talk about, maybe the four of us. I know we've got our meetings, I think tomorrow, and Alexis and I have a sync today to just kind of kick off some of this. So that could be something that we can start in those sessions, which I think will be recorded as well, in case anybody else is interested in what comes out of those.
Heck yeah. Yeah, I think so. I put stuff into this epic, and I don't mean it like this is what Alexis says we have to do or anything like that. I was just trying to like visualize the kind of the scope of work, and then like that way it might help us kind of scope it down a little if it seemed huge, right? Like if it seemed like there was a lot of focus in one area, maybe we better understand like, you know, what you and I, Holly, have to do in a project like this, right? Also, so yeah, I think like, you know, we have a lot of research, to your point, that we've already conducted. So like thinking about how to synthesize that and capture those opportunities and things like that as a starting point. But yeah, let's edit this again, just a starting point.
One thing I'd just like to say too, like on that, I know you had engineering cycles separate, and maybe they should be, but I would love it if engineering could, at the end of each design sprint, either write some retro or some learnings, or just also just have their feedback, so that we make sure like throughout it, we're kind of, that they're looped in, and they also have deliverables, just to at least grok and view all the designs and give lots of good feedback.
Yeah, I love that. And this like engineering cycle, I was just like, I know you all need to do something after. You're probably going to be breaking down stuff, so I'll just put that there. But I love that idea. I mean, is there a way y'all want to be involved? Engineering managers, engineers, whatever. How would y'all like to be involved?
I ideally like through, and Donald, you can chime in. It's probably actually more relevant for front end here, but like it sounds like a lot of this initial work will be, you know, scoping and aligning kind of several different efforts to make them all sort of like fit in the same workflow or like flow of work. So engineering, you know, should be involved, but it's like we should be guiding how feasible some of these things are and how we might break those down. But also like there's kind of a balance to find between what we can actually spend time on or when we can spend time to like kind of undertake that work versus what we're currently working on, right? And so like we wouldn't want to be, you know, trying to pick up and I haven't looked at the epic, but the kind of prototype phase, obviously like engineers would be prototyping things like that, providing feedback. But even earlier, I would expect like some you know, feedback cycle on the feasibility of what we're talking about, the actual like practical, how could we get this done in a way that makes sense. So we should, you know, promote that however it's possible.
Yeah, just to kind of reiterate what Jake said, I think that's exactly what we should be doing, and maybe even having a kind of prototype phase after, or prototype deliverable after each phase, where we're testing out the feasibility given that we have the time to do that at each phase, but we're testing out the feasibility through prototyping or through experimentation on the engineering side. I think that'd be super helpful.
We could even start writing the epics and what will happen beyond the design, beyond the 8 weeks when engineering picks up. We could start formulating the plan now and what will need to happen kind of day one after the design phase is done. But yeah, I think that's a great idea.
There are some decisions that we have to make though on the back end for things like epics requirements, because we have another type of interface, which is the API, and we have a couple of them, and we have to make like fundamental decisions about, do we support, say, one issues endpoint in the REST API and deprecate anything we've built for other things that will be issue types in future? Epics being the obvious one, but then also on the GraphQL API, we've already built, I think, requirements queries and test case queries, even in the case of test cases where they're already issue types. So they're like philosophical design decisions that we need to like unblock now, and we kind of are unblocking them, but they're kind of bigger things. Like if the web if the web interface is going to have like one issue list from which everyone will filter all different issue types, then we might choose to make that decision in the REST API that everything should just be an issues endpoint and you use filters. If in the UI we're going to have like a separate sidebar thing just for incidents or just for test cases, we might decide that the REST API should also have a list endpoint for those things as well. And there are decisions really that we kind of have to make now. Like we can't really defer them because otherwise we have to stop doing the work to like convert things that we've already created.
Also considering our customers will be able to make issue types eventually, so that will be whatever we decide, we'll have to support that. The fact it could be, there could be 100 issue types created. So.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I mean about it being kind of a philosophical decision. Like, what's the point in having like a separate incidence endpoint in the REST API if there could be potentially an arbitrary number of different issue types in the future created by customers?
I think we're almost at time, but I was just going to say, I think I feel like we should be able to get broad alignment on the philosophical issues early, right? Like if there are still questions or we don't agree with the fact that like we should maybe consolidate and have a single issues endpoint and issues like object, and then you can build different views in the product by passing a different GraphQL query that filters by type. So like there's flexibility to do things in the product, but it also like one of the benefits that I see from this is less surface area to manage in terms of endpoints and things and updating stuff and making it so eventually it can be extensible and customers can customize their issue types basically. So I guess like if there are those philosophical disagreements, please raise them now. Dissenting opinions are awesome. So yeah, if you're blocked on stuff, John, let's raise it and argue kindly about it.
Yeah, I don't think we're blocked. Now we resolved something last week about putting issue type into the REST API and what it should be called and so on. Should it match the same name? Like we call it issue type on the back end, but we're exposing it the API as type. And we're adding this as documentation for development in future. So I don't think we're blocked, but it's just, should we uncover something in this investigation that means we change course? Well, we were already taking actions now, like we're already considering that we'll deprecate the requirements endpoint and replace it by simply using the issues GraphQL query going forward and filter there on issue type. So larger decisions like may be difficult to reverse, I guess, but yeah, I mean, if things come up, we'll just raise them and get them unblocked.
Yeah, so I pinged you on the requirements discussions which are being converted, and the plan of conversion depends on whether we decide to keep separate UIs or not, or whether we keep separate endpoints or not. So depending how we decide to approach the UI for requirements, we can prepare a conversion plan, but it depends on it, I think.
All right, we're at time, a couple minutes late. Yeah, I'm sure we'll continue this conversation. Yeah, we should probably have some, we should probably book some engineering alignment meetings like Kristen suggested. Cool, all right. Time's up. Have a good day, everyone. Talk to you all later.